Hi, and welcome to Joining Us, celebrating 50 years of Bands of America. My name is Chuck Henson, and for 35 of those 50 years, I was the primary public address announcer for Bands of America's series of regional and the Grand National Marching Band Championships. Now, over the course of the next 25 episodes, I'm going to do my very best to bring you the people and stories that ultimately have created the excellence that is BOA.
I just was fascinated by this man's marketing ability and the idea that he was putting together a national organization.
Well, one was having hamburgers directly across the table from Dr. Ravelli. So I'm literally watching him eat a hamburger thinking, that's William D. Ravelli having a hamburger in front of me.
Back when Marching Bands of America began in 1975, I and my high school marching band were one of the first to participate.
10 years after the experience, I'm still hearing from kids who thought that was one of the coolest things they ever got to do.
I mean, when you went joining us, those kids went nuts right then. You could have read out of a phone book from that point on. You had them.
They're just going to blow the roof off the place. Like, I get chills thinking about it.
The rifles would spin rifles, then they would catch them and they would fall on the ground at the end of the tune.
Like a death drop.
Yeah.
What's in your blood? If you cut my arm, I'll bleed Bands of America, music for all.
What Marching Bands of America started was innovative, so new, so exciting.
50 years, a half century? Are you kidding me?
Happy 50th anniversary to Bands of America.
So get your program, find a great seat here in our virtual stadium, and get ready to learn everything you ever wanted to know about Bands of America. Joining us from Bellbrook, Ohio. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here, for joining us. 50 years of Bands of America history. And today is a really, really big day because part of the growth, the exponential growth that we talk about with Bands of America happened when the organization moved from the suburbs of Chicago to Indianapolis. And today, I've got two of the guys who were really pivotal in helping to make that happen. First, I want to say hi to Matt Carter. Matt is with, not retired, Visit Indy. Matt, what's your title there at Visit Indy?
Chief Destination Development Officer.
That is very fancy. What does that mean to you and me?
Making Indianapolis a better place to live, work, and play.
That is perfect because that's exactly how Bands of America is going to fit into that, right?
Exactly.
Perfect. Mike Fox also joins us. Now, Mike is a super cool dude who is now retired, but Mike was the director of stadium operations at the RCA Dome. Now, Mike, did that transfer over to the Lucas Oil Stadium as well, or was it just at the RCA Dome?
No, I went from the RCA Dome and was part of the design and development team for Lucas Oil Stadium. So, yeah, I was there for probably almost 10 years of Lucas Oil Stadium. So many, many, many Bands of America shows through the year.
Oh, yeah. Mike, you were always the guy who I would look up and you'd be sitting there with your arms folded in front of you, kind of shaking your head no, going, you can't do that. No. I'll get it done for you, but hold on, you can't do it that way.
Thank you.
I say that with very esteemed affection.
Once an ops guy, always an ops guy.
Yeah, exactly. So I was working for Bands of America when we made that move, and it was really interesting because I want to kind of start with you, Matt, and go back in time a little bit about how the conversation even started to get Bands of America to move everything to Indianapolis.
You know, the irony is that I marched in the 70s, and to recall marching at the state fair and the track show era and recognizing that there was a band program that was perennial favorite, Ben Davis Giants, that no longer competed in the state track event, but went to this field event up in Whitewater, Wisconsin called Bands of America.
That's right.
And for the rest of us who were trying to beat Ben Davis, we couldn't understand why they left and sought something else out.
Now, where did you go to high school?
I was Carmel High School.
You went to Carmel.
I marched 74 to 76 in the Carmel Greyhound Band before it ever participated its first time in the Bands of America event. Roll forward, graduate from college, go into banking, learn business and finance, come to be the CFO for Visit Indy at the time. And our CEO, Bill McGowan, was asking me to evaluate a client that we had. And Mike can confirm this and speak to this more than I can. But my recollection is that Bands of America and Scott McCormick, who was the CEO at the time, actually signed the first contract for the first event in the RCA Dome before we had a football team. And part of that was their move away from the Detroit Stadium, which wasn't in the downtown area and was more remote, to the Indianapolis Stadium that was being built and was going to open in the downtown area, and thought that that could be a better fit.
Yeah, we were Pontiac prior to that.
Yeah, Pontiac Stadium.
Yeah.
And so I went up and did the evaluation on whether we should continue a relationship with the organization or not, because back in that day, the economic value was bands would come and stay on high school gym floors.
Yeah.
So the measurement of economic value for us was heads and beds, hotel room nights. So when I went up there to evaluate, and our CEO didn't know that I'd marched, so I had an interest and understanding of the activity. But when I sat down with Larry McCormick, the founder, and Scott McCormick, the CEO, and Tom McElroy, the chairman of the board back then,
Right.
and Eric Martin in particular, and asked what the vision for the organization was in the future, I remember in that moment saying, oh my gosh, this has got so much potential. They're onto something. And if we could bring that to Indianapolis, it would fit the amateur sports capital of the world icon that the Indiana Sports Corporation and many other things we had, but in a non-traditional way.
The city of Indianapolis has done an amazing job of crafting itself over that plan. You know, it was amateur sports, right? The Pan Am Plaza, the Pan Am Games, the NCAA, the High School Sports Association. And then it shifted to arts organizations, right?
I would say we didn't shift. We paralleled.
Correct. Added on top of.
I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Part of the evaluation was that about that same time, Richard Florida had written a book, The Rise of the Creative Class. And there was a large discussion in cities around America about talent attraction. And there was this phenomenon being called the brain drain, where people were leaving cities as they grew up. And part of that was the boomer generation taught their kids that they can do anything and they can travel. And boy, did they. And so it should be no surprise that when they grew up, that they had the opportunity to live elsewhere. Well, if you're in the Midwest and you're trying to attract talent and you're losing talent, you better figure out what's a magnetic ploy that can bring talent to you if you're going to be a sustainable city. So the strategy behind it really was parallel to what we saw in sports, what we certainly saw in FFA. Agriculture is a huge part of the state. And so the relocation of FFA headquarters and their convention brings 70,000 talented future leaders of agricultural companies to our state every single year. That's a great opportunity to present a city as an option before the kids are thinking about what they want to do professionally.
And that's a perfect fit for Indianapolis.
Not only that, we think it's a perfect fit for the art organizations because you don't have ESPN 1, 2, 3, Sports Illustrated, but the value of the talent that is coming through that activity, and we can talk more about that later, the positively life-changing experience.
Right.
That is a core ingredient to talent that was, quite frankly, missed by an awful lot of other places. And we thought if we could partner with them and help them grow into their fullest potential, we'd be the first beneficiaries of the fruit of that work. But it wouldn't be limited to us alone. It would actually be a platform that would speak to the power of the arts in education in terms of unlocking the potential of every human being to create that human flourishing. And we saw that in Bands of America, just an extraordinary, what Larry McCormick saw in an ability to bring that kind of talent together was really revolutionary in its time.
Yeah, I almost refer to it as the perfect storm of personalities, that everyone came together at the right time in the right place to make all that happen. Mike, was Bands of America one of the first events in the RCA Dome before you had a football team?
I can't confirm that they were the first one to sign an agreement, but I absolutely know for sure they were very early. And if I'm not mistaken, their first year in the Hoosier Dome was indeed 1984. So it makes sense that they would have been one of the first ones, and that was under my predecessor, Jerry Oliver.
Wow.
That's how long ago that was.
How important was that event to the building? Because before we moved there, I mean, it was probably one of the larger events hosted, right? Other than football, when football started.
No question about it. And at that time, we were desperate for events. I mean, we were literally brand new shiny penny. And yes, the city had had success with Pan Am Games or sports festival and that kind of thing, but nothing on the scale that would consistently bring on an annual basis the number of people to Indianapolis, to the stadium from literally all over the country. And it was just another opportunity to show off the facility, show off downtown Indianapolis. And man, I agree. There were a lot of kids sleeping on gym floors back in the day and using high school grass fields because there weren't many turf fields around to practice their craft. But it was huge, absolutely huge. And then it continued to develop. And next thing you know, we've got a regional and a Grand National. And here we are today.
And Matt, I want to talk about the Housing Bureau and how that came to be, how we were able to monetize Bands of America's footprint in Indianapolis. But, I can recall being on staff then when the officers were still in Rolling Meadows and Scott taking us to construction sites in Chicago to look at, hey, this is probably going to be our new office. And then the next thing I know, the offer to move to Indianapolis is happening. How quickly did that process from start to finish go?
We were in the timeline that we originally set out. We did our due diligence, and I can remember good, hard conversations with Larry and Tom McElroy, the chairman of the board, and Scott and Eric Martin, who is the chief operating officer at the time. And, what we wanted to do was be additive to unlocking the vision and the direction of Music for All and back then it was Bands of America.
Right.
And their aspiration was at that same time, they had just hosted their first national concert band festival at Northwestern University. They were holding a summer band camp at Illinois State University. And so what we had taken a look at was, what if we could help open up the aperture of opportunity to allow the organization to scale quicker to achieve its vision? And so we started on that. Now, simultaneously, Indianapolis and Jim Morris, a legendary leader in our community, had just worked to relocate the NCAA headquarter offices from Overland Park, Kansas to Indianapolis. And there was a huge price tag to do that. And so we were following in the tail of that. And there was no way that we could raise the kind of money that the NCAA was able to command, nor were they similar organizations in terms of size. But in terms of impact, we felt they had similar posture. And so the conversations then got pocked with some economic downturns that really affected communities. And I can remember having the conversation with the chairman of our relocation committee, which is a story I want to come back to. Steve Bering, who's the president of Purdue University, who helped us lead that initiative, and why he did, because I think it speaks to the power of Music for All. But in that process, we had anticipated helping build a computer organizational system for the organization. We wanted to open up the National Music Festival to orchestra and to other ensembles, including jazz, and eventually even to choral. We saw that scale. And so what we wanted to do is create the platform to accelerate that opportunity. So in the timeline, we had an economic downturn, and we were going to fall short. And I sat down, and this speaks to the public-private partnership in Indianapolis, with the then mayor, Bart Peterson, and went to his office and said, hey, this is not your problem, but it is your opportunity. Is there anything you could do to help us? We got to close a gap in order to make the commitment to relocate them here. And what he ended up coming up with was a very powerful tool to move them into downtown Indianapolis, into Union Station.
Is that how that came into play?
It is. It was all Mayor Peterson. I can remember very clearly because we were at a crossroads where we weren't sure we'd be able to pull off what we were hoping to do. We wanted them to be a marquee organization, that their employees would interact with the downtown, that they would be in the midst of Civic Square all the time, not in a warehouse in the perimeter of Chicago.
That's exactly what happened. Because as someone who moved from Chicago to Indianapolis, and I think my first apartment, it was right near the monument on the north side of town. And I can recall, getting up in the morning, walking to work every day. It was like 6 blocks. And even in the winter, there's those tunnels and, overhead passes and stuff that you can get through and stay out of the cold. But it felt so connected. Just living and working downtown. And you nailed it, being part of the downtown ecosphere. We felt that. I mean, from day one, it felt special to those of us that worked there.
I've always been grateful to Mayor Peterson for pulling that off. And then I would even say, moving forward, as we began to execute the deal, working with the organization and through the logistics, I mean, you're uprooting people. They're great people. Chuck, you were there. You think of Deb Lafferty-Asbill, you think of Camp Stacy, you think of several of the team that are still fully engaged in the organization 40 years later, and the role they played. And I can remember we did a site visit. I approached Bill Cook and asked if we could use his party bus to come up to Chicago and bring the staff down for a weekend in Indy, where we wined and dined them and tried to win the staff over, knowing that we might be wrecking their lives because they might not be willing to relocate to Indianapolis. But trying to do that as well as we possibly could, to say we're rolling out the welcome mat for the organization, but more importantly for the staff that make the organization possible. And we knew we had a responsibility to making that transition as easy as we possibly could, because it's a difficult one at best.
I want to say of the 7 of us, I think 4 of us came down. Myself, Debbie, Cam, and I'm trying to think of who the 4, well, Scott, obviously.
And Eric.
So that's 5. So we left a couple behind, but it was all so very positive. Now, Mike, as part of the incentives to get the organization to come down, the stadium had a part in that as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, was there a rent situation with the RCA Dome?
Well, it was creative, I think is probably the best way to say it. But it was something that was in everybody's best interest. Because again, we wanted these type of events for all the reasons that we're talking about.
Right.
And we knew that this group was a nonprofit. Some years, was better than others. And the rent structure, and it may still be today, is, you guys do okay, we'll do okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the fairest way to do things. And I think probably, and Matt, you hit it on the head with Ben Davis. I mean, back in the day, it was Ben Davis and Center Grove. That's my recollection.
Correct.
But this group moving to Indianapolis absolutely, without question, raised the level of competitive ability of high school marching bands in central Indiana without a doubt.
Yeah. Because the national stage was in their backyard now.
No question.
Yeah.
And well, one, it was affordable. They could now go without, leasing a plane or whatever it is to go to California or Wisconsin or New York, wherever it was they were going. And I think today those bands, and it ebbs and flows on who's the best or not the best for this reason or that reason. But the number of kids that they are producing that go on to be great citizens, either in central Indiana or elsewhere, it's just staggering.
Isn't that it?
I have said that, I don't know how many different times, that, a basketball team might have 12 kids. A high school football team could have anywhere from 35 to 60.
Yeah.
That's not very many kids. Bands.
300, 250.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you probably had less problems in the building with those kids than you did with some of the other.
There were no problems.
Yeah.
And the parents are the same way. And it's just a overall fantastic experience for everybody. And now it's an absolute, well, it started a long time ago. It's an absolute staple of the downtown fall schedule.
I mean, really, you're right. They've embraced it to the point where, it's that time of year again. I see all the buses in town. It must be Grand Nationals, or it must be time for the regional day. It's not a novelty that the national championship is held in the backyard anymore. It's just part of who we are in Indianapolis. And the city's done such a good job to make that happen. I want to mention a little bit about the other stadiums, because the situation at the RCA Dome and now at Lucas Oil Stadium is so perfect. Mike, were you part of the groundbreaking at Lucas Oil? Were you part of that photograph that I'm thinking in my head?
I don't know if I was exactly a part of the photograph that you're talking about.
But you were there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And from day one, the arguments were there. Not arguments. It's like, okay, we have Colts games and we have NCAA events and we have this, but we now you have 4 essentially marching band events.
Right. Now we're including DCI and the state championship, right?
And a super regional and then the Grand Nationals.
Yeah.
That's 4 every year. And so we have to design into the building something that's going to make this not look like a football field in the middle of a 65,000 seat stadium, but essentially a 50 by 100 yard stage.
Performance stage. Yeah. Matt, were you in that picture?
I was, and Mike's going to be modest here, and so I'm going to toot his horn a little bit. But I want to be clear on this. We had an early conversation in the RCA Dome when we knew that stadium was going to be shifting. We had talked about this and the idea of this back curtain, because when you had the video, Kevin McCormick, who was the videographer who did such a great job in terms working to make sure that looked so professional. I mean, he certainly had help in the producing, but he was just brilliant in terms of making that feel major production values. But when you looked at that, you saw empty seats on the back of the field, which reinforced there's not many people there. And there was a reason there weren't people back there. It's because the bands were playing to one side of the stadium.
That's right.
And so the back curtain that Mike talks about was not inexpensive. I believe we were the only stadium to put winches in a different direction than every other stadium. And that doesn't happen when you're building a stadium for a football team and you're adding NFL amenities and having to value engineer other costs out. What Mike did to preserve and make Lucas Oil Stadium the premier preeminent stadium for Marching Mecca's events was not only that backfield curtain to make it feel like a stage, but a sound wall that separated what was an exhibit hall that needed a sound wall so that the warm-up bands wouldn't be heard in the stadium at the same time as the band on the field.
That's right. Because our event is in November and the weather could be anything at that point.
Correct. And so to contain that all within the building and to create that flow would have been an easy cut because the NFL didn't need that. The Colts didn't need that. Nobody needed that. And the only reason that that remained in there was that Mike was in the room when those cuts and those decisions were being made and was able to say, no, you can't cut that. No, you can't. You don't understand. And so when you talk about a public-private partnership, it takes a village, but it also takes, as Hamilton taught us, I want to be in the room where it's happening. And Mike was in the room where it was happening at critical moments when Bands of America couldn't be there to make sure that what we now take for granted was made possible.
I boast with pride whenever I talk to people about that building and say it's the only NFL stadium in the country designed for marching band.
And it's true. And if you go back to the RCA Dome, we had 2 exhibit halls, I think F and G, if memory serves me correct.
You're good.
So if we went into a brand new gazillion-dollar stadium and didn't have at least that, well, we're going backwards. What's the point?
Yeah.
And so throw that in there with the sound walls and the curtaining and all the backstage rooms and what have you. And it really is, I believe, and Matt's giving me too much credit, but I do believe it's a
No, I'm not.
It's a stage and the lighting and everything that goes with it. And it really looks more like a performance stage than a football field.
100%. And no one would know when you're sitting in the stands looking at the field, that beautiful black curtain with the logos on it. But we're talking about the stands to the left. If you're looking at the field, underneath there is, if you've never been through the flow of Grand Nationals, when the bands come in through the loading dock and they go underneath the stadium, they go into those rooms. And that's where warm up is. There's physical warm up in there. There's horn warm up in there. There's drum warm up back there. And all of that needed to be protected from the people that are on the field performing at the same time. It's no easy task. I mean, what kind of engineering had to go into making that happen?
Well, it's just, I can't talk to the engineering exactly, but bottom line is a guy's on one side of the door playing drums and somebody else is on the other side of the door giving their performance of their lifetime. And they can't hear each other. Bottom line, go make that happen. And fortunately we did. And give HKS, our architects, and a lot of other people involved a lot of credit, because even today, that 45,000 square foot exhibit hall, Chuck, is still a separator from NFL stadiums, even the new ones that are being built.
Really? That's crazy. Matt, I want to go back to that picture for a little bit, because can you describe that picture for me and who all was in it and what was happening at the groundbreaking for Lucas Oil?
You had, obviously, the mayor, you had a host of Civic Square leaders from Indianapolis, that this was a milestone event, right? This was a stadium that the city was growing, and certainly the NFL required a different set of requirements. If we were going to host a Super Bowl, we needed to have a stadium that was at a higher level, and the NFL has used that as a way to get new stadiums in cities across the country. And so the opportunity to see that there were actually as many marching band event days in that stadium as there are NFL football games, and people lose sight of that there are actually more days of marching competition in that building than there are NFL regular season football games. And that's a pretty remarkable stat. And so the old adage that you don't build a church for Easter Sunday is you build a stadium that can be used because it's good for the community every day as much as possible.
Yeah.
And so bringing an activity like Bands of America and the Grand Nationals is just an extraordinary opportunity to import talent from around the country. We love some of the videos we see. I remember a high school marching band in Hawaii that on social media posted, their band director came in and said, "We get to go to the Grand Nationals." And this is a band in Hawaii, of all places.
Yeah.
And they stand and cheer and start chanting, "Indy, Indy, Indy." And it was in that moment that you realized that we had begun to see the fruition of work where something that the kids so enjoyed in high school was affiliated with a city that was willing to open up the doors and roll out the red carpet to welcome them and make them feel as special as they deserve to feel.
Yeah. All right, let's take a moment for a quick break, because I want to listen to some of your stories. Now, remember, if you've got a special Music for All or Bands of America memory or story, you can record it and be a part of this very 50th anniversary podcast. Just visit musicforall.org/podcast to contribute your story.
My name is Scott Casagrande. This organization has profoundly shaped my life and my family's through its influence on our musicianship, teaching, and most importantly, personal growth. From setting ambitious performance goals to learning new instructional techniques, and receiving invaluable guidance from mentors and friends, the constant theme has always been inspiration, the drive to become the best musician, teacher, and collaborator possible while helping others do the same. Any success I have achieved as an educator or performer is directly tied to my experiences with Bands of America and Music for All. One of my most cherished memories dates back to the very first National Concert Band Festival in 1992 during a Meet the Masters reception with Dr. William Ravelli, the legendary director of bands at the University of Michigan. As a young, newly graduated teacher, I watched Dr. Ravelli, then in his 90s, speak passionately about the music being performed at the National Concert Band Festival that year. His words built to an emotional crescendo, his hand shaking so fervently that the water from his glass spilled onto my shirt. I didn't wash that shirt for weeks. It symbolized the passion I hope to find and share through music for the rest of my career. I cannot imagine my musical life without the influence of Bands of America and Music for All. My deepest gratitude goes to the McCormick family and everyone who has supported this extraordinary American treasure.
Now, let's rejoin our conversation. Matt, how important was the creation of the relationship between Music for All and the Indianapolis Public Schools associated with the move down?
Eric Martin, one of the appeals when we were doing the due diligence, Eric Martin had written a white paper, and paralleling at that time, what we were seeing is the growth of suburbs, certainly. And this is probably a longer conversation than you want to have, but I'll try and paraphrase it as best I can. What we were seeing in public school systems and the migration of talent and wealth to the suburbs was dismantling and detangling public school systems around America, not just in Indianapolis, but in every city in the country. And Eric Martin, who became the CEO but was the chief operating officer, was a product of the South that moved his way through the inequality of our history and got his education because of a mom who said, "You will get your education." And he found it in an experience that gave him hope in the band room. And it's a powerful story. If you haven't talked to him about, I would encourage you to do, that transformed the trajectory of his life forward. And it was the same thing that we saw in them. And so to your question on IPS, public schools, was part of the due diligence. He had written a white paper about the widening chasm between the haves and the have-nots, the vulnerable and the privileged. And that Music for All, Bands of America at the time, had an opportunity to bridge that gap and to bring awareness to that growing chasm, because that was a tragic consequence if not addressed appropriately. And so part of the move was to pilot a program to unlock that story. And so with the help of Bands of America, we scholarshiped IPS students to go to the summer band camp in Illinois State University. We scholarshiped directors to go there. We were able to bring, that's where I got introduced to Bob Morrison, who at the time was with VH1 Save the Music.
Yep.
Created a grant to bring funding for instruments to Northwest High School, among others, and a number of other programs that really began to focus in and coming alongside a pilot program in the Indianapolis Public Schools to see how we might begin to recognize that gap and close the chasm between what was becoming the affluent bands of America and the bands that would increasingly have a barrier. And that's not a problem that's been solved to this day.
No.
It's one that I think what we love about the change from Bands of America to Music for All is that transition in brand really helped close that chasm of understanding that this is good for every human being, not just for those that can afford it.
Right. And not just those who can come to Indianapolis for a marching band show.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so their work in identifying that before others were talking about it was really important. And the superintendent, Pat Pritchett, at the time at IPS, spoke eloquently about that and appreciatively that somebody understood with enough foresight what was actually happening. And so we had help and cooperation from them, and Bands of America, Music for All, both brands have been very helpful in trying to bridge that gap in what is a very difficult space to gap. I mean, it is a gap that is hard to close, but they are doing good work in that space.
You know, in the theory of all ships rise when the tide comes in, you know, if we have this wealth of resources in Indianapolis with the suburban directors, with the Carmels and the Ben Davises and the Center Groves, and those directors have all been so integral in going into IPS and helping those directors to refocus or to, if they need things. I've seen uniforms exchanged between schools. We did a huge instrument gathering program years and years and years ago. I can remember, being on the circle during lunch, with our little tent hawking, if you have an instrument sitting in a closet, we need it because Pages was going to refurbish it and we're going to put it in the hands of an IPS kid. And that really made me feel nice. As a matter of fact, my clarinet ended up in the hands of an IPS kid.
And Chuck, I might add to that some examples where that, not just here, we were very careful when we moved Bands of America here that we're not asking you to solve Indianapolis problems. We're asking that when you come here to pilot programs under the watchful eye of a city and your organization, to pilot programs that some that will succeed and some that will fail. But when they succeed, you'll be able to scale that to other cities across the country. And when they fail, you'll be able to tell that story on what not to do. And I think when you take a look at some of the participants that have been historically involved, the Marian Catholic, when you think of, when we talk about this evolution of communities from middle income to wealthy and how Marian Catholic continued to stand in that gap and create an incredible program.
Yeah.
Even when the socioeconomic changed, those experiences were still there. When you think of Lawrence on the east side of Indianapolis and how as the socioeconomic demographics changed in that community, nothing was compromised in their programs and how they continued to afford in more vulnerable communities the same experience. And I think that's just an extraordinary testament to the Music for All brand and how positively life-changing shouldn't be owned by one class of people. It should be a human flourishing strategy that's available to everyone.
And it fits perfect with the mission statement. I mean, perfect. Mike, the relationship that Music for All has with the stadium is so unique and special, and it's essential to have that free flow of information. I can think of other venues. We used to always joke that Mary Catherine Hiller down at the Georgia Dome was always trying to get us to move Grand Nationals down there. It was clearly just a joke. But that relationship was also very important. And I don't know if you know, because when that building went away and the new one was built, Mercedes-Benz, is that what it is?
Correct.
We didn't have that relationship anymore. I think we had one event in that building. I can't imagine what it would cost if we didn't have the relationship that we have with the city and with the stadium to host an event in a building as magnificent as Lucas Oil Stadium. We get taken such good care of by the city, and that relationship means everything. And you guys are the ones that crafted it, basically.
Well, I think, and I liken it to the NCAA. This is not an event that comes to town. This is an event that is being run and hosted by our neighbors.
Yeah.
We're all friends.
Yeah.
We all just work together to put on the best possible show that we can, no different than the NCAA, because they're right down the street. And when you go at it with that type of attitude, even big problems become a lot more solvable because you're going to see this guy at a restaurant or having a beer or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it just makes it that much easier. And you also know, especially with a long-term agreement, that, well, we better solve this problem this year together, or it's just going to continue to be a problem next year and the year after. And that's no good for anybody.
Yeah. I want to tell a little Mike Fox story.
Uh-oh.
Mike would always, if there was an event coming to town, Mike would be like, if you want some tickets for something, just, it's nice to have a guy who's got access, right? So I'm a Kentucky graduate. Kentucky was playing Indiana in the building. And I'm like, Mike, I would really, he's like, yeah, I'll hook you up. Those tickets were dead set in the middle of a giant red section of the stadium. Here I am, me and whoever I was with at our Kentucky Blues sitting dead smack in the middle. And I was like, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. He goes, oh, I didn't tell you where I was going to put you. I just got you in the building.
Yeah. Being from Kentucky, you're lucky I didn't put you in the last row, but that's okay.
Right. So, gentlemen, there clearly must have been issues or stories or things that came up as part of the move that might stand out to you. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So, Matt, were there any crises or things that happened along the way? Or can you think of any kind of funny anecdotes as part of the relocation that you're like, this is great?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you a story just that was a challenge, and it speaks to the public-private partnership and the relationship of a host city that, quite frankly, you're not a client anymore. You're citizens and residents together. And so it was on a Saturday, and I get a phone call from Eric Martin. And then I get a phone call from Scott McCormick saying, we're having a really big problem in St. Louis. And I'm like, all right, because we've told them, if you got a problem, call. And so they called, and it was like, all right. Our CEO at the time was Bob Adell. Bob Adell was the president CEO of Visit Indy, but he had previously been the president CEO of the St. Louis Convention Bureau. And so on a Saturday afternoon, or it may have been a Friday afternoon, get this phone call, we're not going to be able to get our show on because the union's are not going to allow the staging that the bands have to come on and go off for violation of OSHA and a whole bunch of other reasons. And it was a mess. So I called Bob and I said, Bob, I don't know if you know anybody, but can you get on the call and make something happen? And Bob gets on the call and makes something happen. And I get a phone call back about 15 minutes later. And it was like, I don't know what you guys did, but thank you. And that's just kind of how Indianapolis works, is that, you work together. And there are stories like that. So that wasn't an obstacle here. And I'd be remiss if I did not say this. Part of what we did, I spent time traveling to other cities by locking up the Grand Nationals for a long time. When Dallas and Denver and San Antonio and others would call and say, we want to host the Grand Nationals, we wanted to make sure that they said, our next available year is in 10 years. What we knew was the salesperson wasn't going to be there. So they would give up and looking at that. And so we certainly had a strategy of continuity that we wanted to have. But what we did for that for the benefit of that, is saying, but here's what we'll do. If you're not hosting a super regional is the equivalent of a Grand National in St. Louis and in Atlanta and in Texas. We'll help you understand how Indianapolis does the Grand Nationals so that you can do a bigger event in your hometown. And so part of what we've done is said, look, Yamaha's been the sponsor for Bands of America for a very long time. And I knew that we were onto something when Yoshi Doi, the then chairman of Yamaha Japan, called me into his office on a trip I had out there and said, why are you doing this? Why is a city and Visit Indy supporting Bands of America? And so I said, because we make money. And he goes, so do we. Why else? And I said, positively life-changing is something every city needs.
Yeah.
It's a currency that is in short supply. And boy, is that ever more manifest today in society.
Agreed.
And at that time, he said, so why are you doing this? And I said, well, if we're successful in hosting them, our brand will rise. But our brand will rise affiliated with talent that will remember that we cared when nobody knew who they were. And that later off, that may pay dividends for us. But even if it doesn't, it will pay dividends for someone else. And if we're successful, Mr. Doi, you're going to sell more flutes, first-year flutes, first-year trumpets. And in that moment, he turned and he said, how can we help you?
Wow.
And I was not prepared for that. And 6 months later, at Remo Belli's anniversary at the NAMM convention in Anaheim, he came up to me and says, do you have an answer to that? And I was absolutely blown away that he recognized and meant that enough. It also demonstrated how powerful the relationship Yamaha and Bands of America had created over time.
Yeah.
And it was the common bond we had of focusing not just on a business to make money. That was a necessary, you can't sustain and succeed if you don't make money. So you don't apologize for that. But more importantly is, what are you doing with that opportunity? How are you making a difference in society? And so that was a powerful moment where we said, hey, look, there could be times Indianapolis messes up. And so all we'd ask Yamaha to do is when we do, call us and tell us.
Mm-hmm.
But remember this conversation.
Because that's what you can do to help me.
So that you can help us too.
Yeah.
And so we've just had a wonderful relationship with not just the organization, but the important sponsors in the supply chain and the very people that make it possible. And I think that's what a partnership and a collaboration is all about. It's 1 + 1 = 3. And that's been a great lesson and a great partnership that has really spoken to the importance of what this means.
That's fantastic. Now, Mike, I know you did some reciprocal visiting with other stadium directors as well at Grand Nationals.
Oh, no question about it. The one thing about the stadium business, especially the NFL stadium business, is there aren't very many of us. There's only, 30, 32.
Yeah.
And especially the indoor stadiums, there's even less, although that number appears to be growing like every week now. So we would talk a lot about, what's going on in Atlanta or San Antonio or wherever it was, about how we can make the event better. And here's what we're doing and those kinds of things. So it was competitive because we all wanted to keep what we had, but at the same time, we had an eye on what's best for the students. And that was always something I really enjoyed, is that part of collaboration.
Can you think of any interesting stories from the move that popped out in your department? Or did I just frustrate you so much that you blocked all of that out?
Oh my God, they're going to live here now? Are you kidding me?
What do you want now?
No, a couple of things that come to mind, and these aren't necessarily with the move, but we used to do a lot high school football regular season games, a lot. We would do a doubleheader on a Friday and 4 games on a Saturday and then a Colts game on Sunday. And I cannot count the number of times that teams would want to come and play in the RCA Dome or Lucas Oil Stadium just because that meant their band got time on the field to rehearse their show, and it would be extended halftime so they could do their full show and the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, wow, this is a big deal.
I did not know that.
And that happened. I cannot count how many different times that happened. So that was always interesting. And it made the day longer because of the longer half times, but we understood why.
Well, I also want to ask you, you had mentioned about a Colts game on Sunday. It isn't unusual that there'll be a home game on Sunday following Grand Nationals. Can you go through what has to happen at the stadium and the kind of hours that have to happen to flip from Grand National Championship finals, from when I say go for it, break ranks, to when that whistle sounds the next day?
Well, we always looked at it as by the time the kids and everybody were out of the stadium, it was 1 a.m. by the time everybody was gone.
Yeah.
And as much as I tried to get it ending earlier, it never seemed to happen. And then what most people don't realize is for a 1 o'clock kick for a Colts game, the cheerleaders arrive at 6 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Because they start to practice and rehearse, and that's when they can get time. It's like a high school and gym time. There's only so many hours that the NFL kicks them off. So we basically had 5 hours to turn the building around, and that had to do with getting all those curtains down. It's beautiful that they're there, but somebody's got to take them down. And then taking logos off the field. And, I was always proud that because of the band contest, we came up with very interesting ways to put stripes on the field. And most of the time, it was not paint. It was just Velcro or tape. And that made it that much easier for us to get the transition. And in fact, I remember one year, maybe more than once, that, we paid a lot of money for these Velcro hash marks. And we tried to keep them. And one band ended up taking like half of them.
I remember that.
And they ripped them up, and we're chasing them wherever we can get them because we need them the next week for the state high school football state championships or whatever. And we're like, we got to get these back. But it was a lot. But, it almost became routine. And if you're going to be an NFL building, if you're going to be a major league building, this is what you do.
Right.
So
it's a 24-hour operation sometimes.
It absolutely is. And it was hard, yes, but that's what we signed up for. And you weren't about to kick the kids out before they had their chance to celebrate.
Right.
Now, the encores kind of bug me now and then, but.
So I was going to say, Chuck and Mike, I do remember some times that the finales in the earlier days had confetti, and Mike Fox would come over and grab my arm, and he would say, "We have to kill the confetti.
No balloons.
Right.
All that stuff. Come on, give us a chance here.
5 hours to clean up confetti.
Yeah.
Right.
When you only had 6 to turn the building, and so it is a cooperation.
Yeah.
I can recall more than one occasion where I would get on the radio and go, "Someone get Mike. CBS is trying to get into my booth, and I can't. I can't work in here."
Exactly. And that's, that was one good thing about moving into the new stadium is we had that much more space.
Yeah.
And everybody could spread out a little bit and do their thing, and a parking lot that was right there, and 2 ways in and out that weren't airlocks and all those crazy things. And it was just a much better scenario in Lucas Oil Stadium.
Oh, for sure. If anyone, most people wouldn't have seen it, but the master control area where they produce the TV product for football is the most incredible space in Lucas Oil Stadium. It's magnificent. It's better than any TV control room I've ever been in, for sure. Just first class. But if I have a beef, I'd be like, why did you put it at the 0-yard line at the roof? My view in the RCA Dome was so amazing.
Yeah.
It was like 45-yard line right in the middle. So now I just listen through the glass. Well, gentlemen, Bands of America has been around for 50 years, and a big chunk of those in Indianapolis. Clearly, Indianapolis has made its mark on the organization in a very, very positive way. Matt, what do you see for the future, not just of the relationship, but of the event in the city?
Yeah, I think things are going to change. History shows us that. We're seeing just ethnic changes to the composition of the country. We're seeing socioeconomic changes to the country. We're seeing all kinds of issues that are going to change. We see a population shift that is happening in terms of a decline in the growth rates of population. So I think society parallels the trends that it inherits. And so I think what you're going to see is an organization that is doing a great job. The pivot from Bands of America to Music for All, the efforts of the organization to broaden the platform so that every single child has access to music in their lives, not for the sake of selfishly being a fan of music, but for recognizing in the academic K-12 space in particular, that the role that the creative and imagination space called an ensemble has an ability to attract people to want to come to school. And even if they don't want to learn, they want to be in an influential peer group of like-minded people and in unlike-minded people. I think one of the extraordinary things that you see if you follow these activities is to go watch a rehearsal and see the diversity of kids on the field that have little in common, including the instruments they play, right? I mean, you got trumpet players and trombone players and clarinet players and flute players.
Right.
Even the diversity of instrumentation is a pretty remarkable thing in terms of how that sets itself up. But more importantly to that is that they are learning a work ethic at a time when work ethic is a difficult thing to grasp in our society. They are learning cooperation and leadership, responsibility, discipline, a whole host of things. But they're also, in the leadership structure of almost every one of these ensembles, is a student-led triangle pyramid of hierarchical leadership that really helps train the kinds of skill sets that are necessary for human flourishing. And so I think what you're going to see is maybe 50 years from now, we won't have a Grand Nationals. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I guarantee you that the ingenuity of the organization holding on to that phrase, positively life-changing, that is their currency of relevance, that embracing that and applying that in the K-12 academic space is a beacon for what education should include. And I'll give you just one example. We talk about classroom size and teacher-student ratio, and we want classrooms where there's one teacher to 20 students, and we think that's the optimal size. But down the hall, we have an ensemble of 300 kids with one director.
Right.
And there's no way they can control that room without discipline, without leadership. It's a foreign language. It's a difficult thing to master. And during the classroom day, there is a decorum of cooperation that little is the same, but they're all working towards an end goal that is shared. And I think that piece shines bright in what Music for All stands for, why we consider it a great honor to host and have them call Indy home. And while we will also see it as an enormous responsibility to partner with them to unlock that potential, not just for our city, but for the canvassing of their reach further and further and further. Because if we can do that, we'll be the first beneficiaries, but we'll also be proud citizens of being partners with theirs forever.
Well spoken. Well spoken. Mike, how does it make you feel knowing the mark you've had on this organization? I mean, there was a time when you had never heard of Bands of America.
No. In fact, when they first came to town, I said, what? And same thing with Isma and anybody else.
Yeah.
And like Matt, our high school, I'm from Richmond High School, and we were very competitive in the state fair back in the day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what is this thing now? And then over time, you gain so much respect for these people. The kids, and John Parshall, who I know you both know, was our band director when I was growing up at Richmond, and his wife was a school teacher of mine 2 different years. No, I didn't flunk. She switched grades, just for the record. So you talk about me having influence on the organization. I don't know if that as much as they had influence on me and my gaining respect for every little part and piece, that a band is compared to an athletic team at a high school. And I'm a huge advocate of high school sports. I still officiate basketball, but bands are underfunded, underappreciated. They're undercoached, if you will, to Matt's point, where the athletic teams, I'm not going to say they get everything they want, but it's a whole lot easier for them. And that has, to me, been probably the biggest influence that they've had on me, is just the general understanding. And I would tell kids this all the time, that I was interviewing, interns. They bring their resume in, they did this, that, and that. Well, wait a minute, how come were you in the high school band by chance? Well, yeah. Why don't you put that on your resume? Well, I said, well, wait a minute. Do you know how many people out there played in the high school band compared to playing on a football team or a basketball team or baseball or softball? It's not even close. So again, that's more of the effect that they had on me than I think I ever had on anybody with the group or the organization.
Mr. Carter, you come at it from a very unique perspective. Not only were you an alumni of Carmel, but all your girls were part of the band program, right?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, in fact, we had the honor of the first Tournament of Roses band. They got to carry the banner down the street in Pasadena one year as 13-year-olds. It was a great honor. And they got to come up through the program.
You must also have some crazy reflections that you've done based on your impact, bringing the organization to town, everything. You speak so beautifully about the virtues of music and music education, and that all comes from your heart. I mean, we can all hear that. You must be incredibly proud of what the city has done and the lengths to which they've welcomed Bands of America to Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think it is certainly a legacy, and I'm a behind the scenes. Mike's a behind the scenes. One thing I'll relate about him is Mike's got a tough persona because he was student manager for Bobby Knight, and he learned how to ref practices, probably the hardest course to take, made him a great official. So when he speaks to the importance of this, that's high praise when you take a look at the backstory of how he was brought into this position. But for me, I mean, I think I certainly saw its impact in my life. My mom was a music educator. My dad was in business, and music was just a constant in our life that, quite frankly, I took for granted a little bit in our own kids' lives. And I had a daughter who said, Dad, I'm never going to get to do Bands of America. They were young and growing up. And I said, why not? And she goes, I want to play the violin. And I said, well, why don't you write Mr. McCormick a letter? And she did as a 9-year-old. And I remember Scott saying, hey, your daughter has to come down to Cluse Hall because during the National Music Festival, we're piloting the Orchestra America idea. And so to see that leadership opportunity that Bands of America created in your own life, my daughter, who was a pianist, who said, I'm not going to be in the marching band. I can't be in the marching band. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, I play piano. And I said, why don't you go talk to them? I guarantee you most of those drummers don't know how to play mallets, and you use 10 fingers. So she became a part of the pit ensemble, and it was a great honor to see them win the Grand Nationals and have your daughter there. So, to see that go from they didn't know what it was to something that Dad did, that they became exposed to, that they wanted to do, and then to have success in that is pretty extraordinary. And that's from a personal standpoint. From a city legacy standpoint, you could do a separate podcast on the people that I've gotten to know that have graduated through this activity and the extraordinary work they're doing all over the world. And I've often said when I served on the board of directors that we talk about the championships, but the championships are really manifest in the people they become. That positively life-changing is not a slogan. It is a DNA, brand, and it is powerful. And anything we can do to help unlock that, to help people see this is not just an activity. This is a core ingredient into the success of human beings. And I think that is a powerful thing. And so to have that happen in Indianapolis, where I get a chance to say I was a part of that, is just extraordinary. I want to share one last experience separate to this. I mentioned at the beginning that when we wanted to relocate them here, everybody suggested I should recruit the university president from IU because of the Jacobs School of Music. And I said, there was a sport slogan that was being used by the NCAA and the IHSAA back at that time on the importance of athletics, and that 90% of the students were going to go on to be successful in something else. And I truly believe that because of that experience. And I saw the same in the arts, and I didn't see it celebrated at the same level. And so I said, I'd rather talk to the president of Purdue University because they don't have a degree program. And so Steve Beering, who was the president of Purdue University many years ago, we had a lunch meeting at the Skyline Club, the highest point in Indianapolis, to ask if he would chair the task force of CEOs to relocate Bands of America to Indianapolis. And I said, we'd like you to chair. And he said, I'll do it. And I'm like, wait a minute, you haven't even heard the pitch yet. You don't even know what I'm going to ask you to do. And he says, I'll do it. And I said, all right, Dr. Beering, you've got to explain that. And he said, I'll deny it if you ever tell it. So here we are. I'm telling it. And I've told it before. He said, Purdue University, we just did research on our engineering students who had been accepted at MIT, Rose-Hulman, and Purdue. And I wanted to understand why students who had scholarship to go to all three places chose Purdue over those other two. He said, because I would deny this, but I'm the president of this university. And if this was my son, I would be saying, you're making a bad decision. You should go to Rose-Hulman or MIT. And the response to the research I got was stunning to me. The number one reason they chose Purdue over those other two was that they got to continue to play music and be a part of the Purdue marching band.
Yeah.
He did not believe the statistics, so he called the band department and said, I want a roster of the engineering students. And he says, that's half our band. And he said, how do you know that? And he says, because we recruit on engineering day at Purdue. So I said, what'd you do? And he said, and he had a very German accent. And I will not do injustice to it. And he says, I called the marketing department of the engineering school and said, I want the Purdue drum on the cover of the engineering recruitment brochure.
Bravo. Bravo.
My point is that it took a university president who didn't even know fully what we were asking to give a testimony to the importance. You asked a question, what's the future of this organization look like?
Yeah.
It looks like that.
That's fantastic. That is a beautiful place to leave it. Gentlemen, on behalf of everybody that's ever walked through the doors at a BOA event, thank you. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mike, for everything you did to bring Bands of America and Music for All to Indianapolis, to make it a home that feels comfortable and safe and certainly a place to grow. You're two quality human beings, and I'm very proud to know you. Thanks for doing this today. I appreciate it, Matt. Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Joining Us podcast. We are celebrating 50 years of Music for All and Bands of America. Do you have your own story or memory to share? Well, I want to hear it. You can record your own story by visiting musicforall.org/podcasts. We may just include your voice in a future episode. Hey, thanks to Yamaha, our national presenting sponsor. And don't forget to make sure you're subscribed to the Music for All Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. I want to thank Ben and Laura from the team at Music for All for making this happen and lining up all of our guests. And of course, the way it sounds, that's the magic of our executive producer, Patrick Keller. I'm Chuck Henson. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week on Joining Us. Joining us from Avon, Indiana.